Alright, it is time to take my single action 45 back out to the range. If you've been subscribed to the channel the last few weeks, you know I've picked this revolver up recently, and I found that the chamber mouths were a little bit large, and so I recently did a bunch of testing with a bunch of different bullets, both size .452 and larger, to see if I could get any sort of accuracy from this revolver. And through that testing, I found that with the larger bullets that I cast, I could get a little better accuracy than with some factory bullets that I had. And so now I've got this thing cleaned up. I had some leading in the barrel, and I've got that all cleaned out. And now I'm going to take it out and test a couple of loads that seem to show some indications of some accuracy and see if they really do work out for me. What I've got here are 3 different loads with this full wad cutter. 3 different loads with this semi-wad cutter, and then a load with this MP bullet. This is the bullet you've seen me using in my 1911 recently. This gray one is just a different powder coat, and then these I did not size. These are sized to .452, but this is the same bullet, just not sized and then powder coated, and it comes out to about .454 or .455, and these are sized to .457. And that MP bullet, it comes out to about 222 grains. Similar profile to this. This is a factory 250 grain bullet, and not seated quite as deep, but kind of that round nose, flat point. And then here's that semi-wad cutter loaded up, and here's the wad cutter loaded up. Now, last time I loaded this bullet, I had the mouth of the case crimped just over that where the radius started there, just over that line. And for this one, I've gone with an overall cartridge length of 1.6 inches. And so I did a roll crimp into the powder coat just under that edge. And I'm thinking this is going to be a little bit better setup than rolling over the front of that. So I'm loaded up with 6 grains of Unique for these 2 bullets, which should give me somewhere between 650 to 700 feet a second. And then I've got them loaded with 8.5 grains of Unique, which I think will probably end up being my normal load. And then I've also loaded them with 9 grains of Unique. That showed some accuracy promise in my previous testing, and I want to revisit that. And then the MP bullet I've got loaded with 9.2 grains of Unique, which I think should give me in the neighborhood of 1,000 feet per second. So I'm headed to the range. Let's see how these do. Well, we're back at the bench, and before I cover any of the targets, let me just say I promise there was no bump firing of my single action 45. I just edited the video so that it took up less of your day. Now, previously when I shot a bunch of different rounds through this, I shot that from a rest at about 10 yards. And for that shooting, most of the shots were low and left. Today's shooting was standing. It was offhand at 7 or 8 yards. And I noticed most of the shots today seem to be closer to point of aim. Now, I'm going to assume that's because this part right here previously was sitting on the rest, causing it to recoil differently. So it seems to be that the sights really are, not that you can tell from these targets, but the sights really are pretty close to point of aim when you're not shooting from a rest. Now before we look at the targets, let me go ahead and give you a couple of excuses right up front. And the first of those is my eyes. I'm starting to get to a point in my life where I'm realizing that my eyes are not what they once were. I don't yet wear glasses for most things, but I don't think that's very far away for me. And then when you combine that with these sights, that looks like a big front blade. But if you look here, that's just a tiny little groove in the back. And when you line those two up, it actually looks better in this picture because the distance from the camera to here is not arm's length, it's just a few inches. But that little tiny blade in that little groove is not the easiest sight picture that I've ever seen. And as you look through there, you're only getting the very top portion of this, and so really the only part of this blade you can see is this little rounded piece here. Now I've been told focus on the front sight, focus on the front sight, but when all I can see is the very top edge of that and it's rounded, not the worst sight picture in the world, but not the best either. And combine that with any target that's not solid white, and I can certainly hit the paper every time with this, but putting every single shot into the same hole, a big limitation in that scenario is the shooter, me. Combine my eyesight and these sights with the fact that really I'm not a great shot. And then the one other contributing factor, it's probably the biggest in this, is the fact that the entire time I was shooting, I was continually trying to find the exact right grip. Is it pinky under? Is it? So I was fighting that grip a little bit to see what was comfortable. And I think some of these shots that go way off is not the firearm or the bullet. It's me making adjustments throughout the whole time and on exactly how I was holding this grip. That being said, let's take a quick look at these targets. When I shot the factory rounds through this revolver before, I was getting about a 4-inch group, and that right there is about 4 inches. And I think today I saw that these rounds are definitely shooting better than those factory were. Now for these two targets, these are the last two that I shot. These are the MP bullet. I call it MP because the mold that I cast those from is from MP molds. And I wanted to see how this bullet would shoot through here, partially for this bullet, but as well, I have a hollow point from that same mold. And if I could get this to shoot well, then I would have a hollow point option that was working in this revolver. And if we just ignore this target and ignore these two shots, then hey, look at that 8-shot group, that's looking pretty good. But as we look across both targets and then we look at the numbers, these were loaded with 9.2 grains of unique. And I shot 20 shots, I only put 15 over the chronograph. And it gave an average of 968 feet per second, but I had an extreme spread of 106. My lowest shot was 908 feet per second, and the fastest shot was 1,014 feet per second. So across those 20 shots, I had a standard deviation of 32. And I'm glad that I shot more than a few, because if I just saw this, I'd say, hey, this is doing great. But as I look at an extreme spread of 106 feet per second across 20 rounds, and I see a group like this, I realize this is a bullet that I can shoot in here, but why would I? So I won't tell you I'll never load this in the 45 Colt again, but I doubt you'll see it anytime soon, except for in the 1911. Now this target was the 9 grains of unique with the full Wadcutter. Those 9 grains gave an average of 953 feet per second with a spread of 39 and a standard deviation of 13. And I really like the hole that Wadcutter cuts in these targets. That's probably just under a 4-inch group, and with the 9 grains with the semi-Wadcutter, I shot a similar sized group and got similar numbers. This was an average of 972 feet per second with a spread of 25 and a standard deviation of 9. Now these 10 shots, a lot of them are in here. Was this me? Was it the gun? Was it the bullet? My money's on me as the shooter, but that's okay. As we drop half a grain to 8.5 grains of unique with the full Wadcutter, this is 15 shots, and those 15 gave an average of 912 feet per second with a spread of 34 and a standard deviation of 10. And I really do think that some of this is my playing with the grip. These two shots were consecutive and they went in pretty much the same hole. And if you just look at the group in the middle and ignore a couple of the outliers that, again, I guarantee was me the shooter, that's about a 2.5 inch, maybe 3 inch group. And for the 8.5 grains with the semi-wad cutter, again, if you even just this one outlier, you ignore that, that's a 2.5 inch group as well. And 8.5 grains of Unique with the semi-wad cutter gave an average of 924 feet per second with a spread of 29 and a standard deviation of 8. So either bullet, it looks like 8.5 grains is going to give an average of about 920 feet per second, which with a 255 grainish either full wad cutter or semi-wad cutter, I think is going to be a great all-around load. And then when we look at the 6 grains of Unique with the full wad cutter, that was an average of 698 feet per second with a spread of 26 and a standard deviation of 9. This is 10 shots, and so ignore this shooter error here. It's a decent little 8-shot group. I only point that out to say I think these bullets in this revolver really are a good combination. Now, if I can just fix the shooter, we're going to be doing pretty good. And for the semi-wad cutter with the 6 grains of Unique, that 10-shot group was 702 feet per second with a spread of 55 and a standard deviation of 14. And again, this is a 10-shot, so if you ignore those 3, that's 7 shots right there. I've actually been back out to shoot this again since these targets. I didn't put any of it on video, but as an example, that's the semi-wad cutter with 6 grains of Unique, so about 700 feet per second. You can see it's grouping, and I still have issues. 5 shots with the wad cutter at about 700 feet per second. Again, I'm shooting better than the factory rounds were. And 5 shots with the wad cutter at about 920 feet per second. Starting to figure this thing out. So, probably as a result of matching the size, so a larger bullet than the factory. So oversized bullet plus powder coating. I ended up with a lot less leading in here. There was still a little bit of leading, a little bit of buildup in the forcing cone, but there was considerably less leading than when I was using the factory rounds. I believe this is going to be a great firearm to practice the fundamentals, the consistent grip, the sight alignment, the follow through, the trigger control, the breathing. I think some of the challenges I have with this are going to force me to, with some constant trigger time with this, are going to force me to become a better shooter. Either that or it's going to force me to just not care about groups at all. Now, I did notice after a bunch of shooting that a couple of the screws in here were getting a little bit loose, so if you're shooting one of these, make sure you're checking those occasionally. And you may consider something like a blue Loctite or something like that on them. Well, now that I have the molds for these and I know that they're working better than the factory, I don't plan to put any more factory lead bullets through this revolver. I still have a box of 50, so what should I do with those? That's the subject for another video. So, thank you for watching, and God bless.